It has been a while, and I've been reading a lot since then, and it is good that the stuff that I've been reading fits in well today with Father's Day, because it's Father's Day. Happy Father's Day, Padre! And before I go into that, there were some things today that really were good for Father's Day, to really help me appreciate fatherhood and my great dad. And my dad isn't perfect, of course. He's probably one of the few people who will rejoice to see me clean-shaven. And it was weird, by the way. Shaving takes forever. Oh my gosh. I forgot that was one of the reasons why I gave it up in the first place, because it takes so long. But today in church, I got to substitute for teaching the 12 and 13-year-olds. And the lesson was, as you might have seen on Facebook, how women and priesthood holders work together in the church. And yeah, so I was talking about the ways that women have worked throughout the church in its history in order to help everything go smoothly, and even how important and essential parts of the gospel wouldn't be able to happen without women. And not just, the fact that we wouldn't exist if it wasn't for women. Not going to quote much ado about nothing here, but I broke it down, the story of Ammon and Lamoni and the conversion of all the people of Middoni into Christianity, and how without the intervention of the queen and Abish, that never would have happened. And it even specifies this in the text in Alma 19. So that chapter, and even though neither the queen or Abish is mentioned in the chapter heading, which is a huge oversight, it starts with the queen inviting Ammon to come talk to her, and everything that Ammon does is framed as being in response to the queen's wishes. So it's kind of and about how the queen is doting over her husband, and about how Abish goes and gathers the people, and even when Lamoni is brought back after Abish raises the queen and the queen raises Lamoni, Lamoni and Ammon teach the people, and the people don't believe Lamoni and Ammon. And they don't start to believe and be converted until the other people, including the queen and Abish, start to preach to them and share their witnesses. And that's really cool. But the thing that was so crazy to me is that in this classroom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 kids, I think, 2 girls, 8 boys. Only one of them knew who Lamoni was, right? 12 and 13-year-olds. Like, I can kind of get that. Nobody knew who Abish was, which is disappointing, to say the least. But here's the real crazy thing. Only 2 of them knew who Ammon was. 2 of them. When I said, okay, so tried to give them hints, so Lamoni, I'll give you a hint. Lamoni is in the section of Alma 18, Alma 17 to 26, which is about the sons of Messiah. Oh, no, sons of Lamoni is not, he's one of the sons of Messiah. No, Lamoni is not one of the sons of Messiah. Lamoni was somebody who was taught by Ammon, who was Ammon, and one of them was he was a really good guy in the scriptures. Even with all this hints, even if all you know about Ammon is that he's the guy who cut off the arms, you should at least know that part. And they didn't even know that part. It's oh my gosh. So thank you, Dad, for teaching me at least to know who Ammon and Abish and Lamoni were. Thank you for teaching me what the priesthood was, and thank you for teaching me, through your example, if not directly by words, that the priesthood is something that you and Mom did together. I had a quote downstairs in my room. My memory says that it's something from Von J. Featherstone, who was very impactful in my father's life growing up and in adulthood. And so I think it's that. I've looked for the quote. It doesn't appear anywhere in anything by Von J. Featherstone, but the sentiment appears throughout a lot of early LDS things, and actually appears in a lot of early Christian things, including in the book of Revelations, but it even appears in a sermon, a homily, I should say, by St. John Chrysostom, the Golden Tongue. That's what Chrysostom means. I don't know why I'm looking. It looks like I'm reading off of something, but there's nothing down there. It's the edge of the thing, and like my shorts, because I changed my pants when I got home, because dry cleaning is expensive. And that is, the priesthood is not simply the power to act in God's name. The priesthood is the power to become like Him. So for me, I always guess I understood that, obviously, if the priesthood is the power to become like God, the priesthood is something that both men and women have, because we come together to become like God. But that's not where I was going. That needs to go, sorry, there's flies in here. That needs to go back to what I've been reading. So my reading since the last video, Isaiah, Jeremiah, of course, which I talked about, Ezekiel, which comes later, and then Daniel, and just last night read Hosea. And Daniel is an exception to the weird prophet's rule. Ezekiel's really weird, Jeremiah has its really weird moments, Isaiah has weird things that he's asked to do, but Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel and Hosea, one thing that's very different about them compared to the modern Christian context is how they were asked to do really weird things as examples and as signs of the relationship between God and His people, the relationship between the prophets and humanity, the relationships between God and the prophet too. But Hosea really highlights this. Hosea, the first 3 or 4 chapters, is a real clear illustration of the way that God's relationship was portrayed as a marriage with Israel, where God was the husband and Israel was the wife, and all the ways that it didn't work out as a marriage. This does, of course, appear in Ezekiel. It appears in the histories. It appears, of course, in Song of Solomon. But in Jeremiah, there's some references to it too. But in Hosea is commanded to go and find a prostitute, marry her, get her pregnant multiple times, name the children after different things, different gospel-related or anti-gospel-related topics, if I remember right. One of them is cannot have mercy. One of them is like cannot be redeemed, to talk about how Israel has basically sold itself as a whore to other gods. And Hosea is trying to point out, or the Lord's trying to point out through Hosea, that even if your wife did this, you're still going to love her, and you're going to feel betrayed and angry, but that doesn't mean that God doesn't love his people, Israel, anymore. And so that was on my mind with Father's Day. And then, of course, Daniel being in the middle between Ezekiel and Hosea. Daniel's a really interesting thing, too, on the subject of fatherhood, because the status of most of the prophets as fathers was so important to who they were, right? And Jacob and Isaac and Abraham, right? We don't even call them the prophets, we call them the patriarchs, because their fatherhood, their head of the churchness, was so tied into their head of the familyness. And even with Mosiah and Alma and Nephi and Jacob and Lehi, so much of the scriptural accounts we have is of people being fathers, and in Daniel there's none of that. Daniel was possibly, I'd say probably, a eunuch. There's definitely no reference to marriage, to family, to anything. Eunuchy, castration, was a pretty big thing in the world at that time, and we know that he served in the court of the eunuchs. We know he served under the direction of the chief eunuch, although it never says specifically that he was himself a eunuch. It seems to be pretty clear that he probably was. And so Daniel's story is tied into other families. It still goes back to the family. It's tied in so closely to Nebuchadnezzar, and there's this running theme in the early stories about Nebuchadnezzar, but then when Belshazzar, I used to know their real names, is brought in later, it's the story of Belshazzar is framed in the your father did this, your father and your mother taught you. Why didn't you listen to them? And then later, of course, it ties back into the way that God is the father of all of us, and even goes back to our biblical primordial father of Adam, and just brings it all. Sorry, my nose just suddenly started running. It's annoying. And so even in the story of Daniel, where there isn't a father figure, where he's not the father of anyone, as far as the record attests, and possibly couldn't have been a father, this theme of tying of the gospel and the priesthood and all of this existing in order to tie families together and in order to transmit the lessons from one to the other is so important. And for that, Dad, for taking the time to teach me. And yes, I know, I'm going to say it again, you are perfect, because if I don't say it, you will, and I'm just going to get it out of the way in advance. To take the time to have scripture, to have prayers, to take the time to tell stories again, to take the time to teach me to find my own answers, whether in the scriptures or in other places, how helpful that has been in my life, and how, as I get older, of course, I begin to realize more clearly just how important that skill was that you taught me, and of course the skill to recognize that sometimes life just gets stressful and we need a break. And I'm so, although I guess that was probably more for Mom, because we were a lot more stressful for her than for you. But thank you, my dad. Thank you, other dads out there. Thank you, scriptures, for having good and bad examples of fathers and good and bad examples of families. And I love y'all. Have a good day.